The virtual conference Live Talks is the brainchild of Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman. It was initially developed as an emergency education channel to help professionals and general public manage their emotional and psychological response to the pandemic of 2020 by hosting the world's leading psychologists, researchers, and authors, and providing a platform for nano-live-workshops. It is now expanded into becoming a showcase for people to share their work and ideas in order to educate and inspire us to follow our own personal paths of value. Now please welcome your host, Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman.
Wow. Hello and welcome to another virtual conference Live Talks with myself, Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman. And what a climax, what a culmination of weeks of brilliant guests doing their bit to share their knowledge and wisdom and experience to help others, those who are watching, with the current pandemic situation and distresses that we're all going through, including my guests. My guest now is Professor Stephen Hayes, and I could say lots and lots about Stephen Hayes. I'm going to let him do the formal kind of introduction, you know, more of his academic and his work side. What I would like to say is what my relationship with Stephen Hayes is and why he is so important to me personally. And apart from his brilliance and his academic qualifications and his building a wonderful organization worldwide and being one of the leading psychologists, for me, Stephen Hayes is more than just that. For me, Stephen Hayes is a model of generosity. And he's so generous that made an absolute mark in me and was a model for me to go out and do that to others. And that's basically where this series of talks comes from. It's about being generous. It's about giving without necessarily expecting anything in return. And my experience with him was when I was doing my master's degree and my supervisor said, why don't you do some research on ACT? And ACT I really hadn't heard of. And so when I did a little bit of research, I came up with the name Stephen Hayes, and I wrote to him. And this was about 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago now, and told him what my plans were, never really expecting to get a reply from such prestigious professor. But not only did I get a reply, I got a long reply, and I got a reply telling me all about him and the fact that I was writing to him from Israel and his connection to being Jewish and what Israel would mean to him. But not only that, he flooded me with old research and old papers and everything that he could possibly find in his computer to help me get on my way when I was working as a volunteer in a dual diagnosis ward, and that was where I wanted to research with ACT. That flood of generosity took me by surprise, because up until then, any kind of modality of psychology that I had been working with, and I'd been working with a few, always wanted to put me through these type of certification programs before I could actually even get to somebody. But this kind of open source model that Stephen Hayes came up with, I saw that actually it had filtered down into everybody in the community. And so when I went to workshops and I went to universities for lectures, and all these people that were involved with this ACBS community all had this generosity of giving and giving and giving. And I couldn't help but take that on board. And so not only that, but the work I've been trying to do in Israel and to trying to promote ACT, Stephen Hayes has been right behind me every minute. Any time that I've asked him for an interview, he has always just said, when is it? And even at one point, it took me 6 months to talk to him because I was so confused. I didn't know what I was going to ask him. And he said to me, do you know how to have a conversation? And I said, yeah. He said, so let's just have a conversation. That, to me, is Stephen Hayes. That's what it means. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Stephen Hayes to come in from the green room and join us for another virtual conference. So welcome to the virtual conference, Professor Stephen Hayes. I'm so appreciative of your time to come here.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I enjoyed sitting in the green room and listening to your introduction. It was very sweet.
So the reason why I invited you, among other guests, especially from the ACBS community, was that the world's gone through a pandemic. It's a first, basically, that we've, at least in our generation, we've experienced something like that. It's certainly a first that the world has basically closed down its economy in one way or another. And so it brings all sorts of uncertainty, whether it's a health uncertainty, whether it's worry for family and friends, whether it's economical uncertainty, or whether it's just, as we're kind of, some countries are beginning to move out of this lockdown situation, there's that uncertainty of, going out into the big world again, and what it's actually going to mean for us, and what's being kind of called, or the new norm, whatever that will mean. And so what I wanted to do was to invite people that I knew and trusted that could share some of their knowledge, experience, and ultimately the wisdom that they've accumulated with the people that are watching this. And it came in the end to invite the top of the pyramid, what I would say, or the originator, which is yourself, because I see and constantly return and use it every day of my life, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's really helped me personally, and it continues to help me. But before we get into the program tonight, you are in exactly the same situation as all of us. And so what I like to ask my guests is, how did Stephen Hayes get through this, from a personal point of view? How do you do it?
Well, I am here sheltered in place with my family, and it's been a challenge, I think, in some ways, a very interesting one, because you kind of find yourself focusing on things in a different way. I'm doing a whole lot of Zoom meetings and things of that kind. I'm running my classes that way. I'm supervising my students that way. I'm involved with podcasts. I was working on a new online course, ended up, instead of doing it in the studio, it's all being done this way, etc. So it's been quite an interesting set of challenges and opportunities. A little more time with my family, of course. My 14-year-old went through quite a little shift there. How is he going to survive without hanging out with his friends? And it turns out very well inside the virtual world. You wonder what it must have been like with the 1918 flu epidemic and stuff, where people had to shelter in place with nothing other than rumors and, no contact with the outside world. It must have been really, really difficult. We're blessed in some ways. Here I am talking to you many thousands of miles away, talking to people around the world. So we're interconnected in a way that I've taken advantage of in the downtime. Although you asked sort of how have I found myself doing things like in my yard, there's a very nice kind of landscape thing with rocks. It's made to look like a stream. Of course, there's no stream in the desert in Nevada, but over the years, it's got completely filled with silt and dirt. And so I found myself on my hands and knees, one at a time, removing tens of thousands of rocks and taking the dirt out and then putting them back and saying, "Oh, how beautiful." And then at some point I'm saying, man, this COVID thing, you've got the point where it's enjoyable to like move rocks. But it looks beautiful now. If you come over to my house, you can say, wow, that's wonderful. I think, appreciating the small things of being able to watch a movie with your family, or to be able to just have a conversation, or to sit on the back porch and drink your coffee. And aren't these things that are always important to us, but in the busy, go day, sometimes not given proper attention and due weight. So it's been an awakening in some ways to remembering things that have always been there and always have importance, but sometimes you forget.
Yeah, absolutely. I think personally, that it's, among all the distress that's going on, it's certainly allowed us another opportunity of the slowing down, whether we like it or not. But we've had this opportunity to, what are we going to choose to do, because this slowing down has basically been forced upon us, and we can choose to do things that are useful for us or not. I also had an experience. I took up gardening, which I've never ever done, and so I started to buy these little tomato seeds,
Yes, sure.
Little plastic cups, like maybe the only last time I remember doing something like that was like in primary school, and so I've got a little crop growing now, and it's and I'm looking after it and tending it, and then I bought a few plants here and there, and I go out and I water them, and I do, and it's amazing how you can become much more mindful in these kind of things that I never had time for before. I never even bothered. I had a garden at 4 years. I never walked in it. I just went my front door to the street. I didn't even go into it. And now it's become another room for me. It's become another place.
Well, that's happening around the world. And it's not because people are afraid of running out of food. We have a garden in our back, and we plant it each year, and I tend to it. So I completely redid the drip system, and I, dug all the things out. I did all those things. Some years I do that, some years I don't. But then I went to get plants, and with my mask on and so forth, I went to a grocery store that also has quite a selection of plants, and there was almost nothing there. And it was early, and I'm like, what? And it's because there's been a run on tomato plants, and I still don't have my zucchini in because I can't find them. And so I think it's that people are grounded by their connection to nature and to the dirt and to the earth, and to have something to do that's like that, that's sort of primitive. I mean, after all, we say things like being grounded, being humble, having our feet on the ground. We have metaphors like that. Humble comes from the word for dirt, right? Humus in English. And so I think we're going back to our roots. There's another metaphor, isn't it? So the gardening is a worldwide phenomenon. And I'm enjoying our little garden. It's growing very nicely, and the new drip system is perfect. I just wish that I could get I'm putting some new caps so that I can have a little bench come up so I can sit in my garden. And I've created this thing, but I need some special wood to do it exactly right. And so far I haven't been able to get to the store that does that. It's been closed, but just today it opens. So I'll put my mask on and maybe continue to
venture out. Fantastic. So let's see. There's some people joining us. We have a Facebook user says, very excited to hear you, Professor Hayes. Shout out from Israel. And thank you again, Dov, for this virtual conference. Kathy Russell from England says, finally managed to catch one of your lives.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Dov. Limor Attar is watching. I know she's watching from Israel as well. We've got somebody from Norman Evans from Toronto coming in. So there's Fantastic. We've got people tuning in here from all over the world, Stephen. So let's see what else we've got. We've got Lara Fielding. She says, cool, very excited to tune in. Liat says that she's also very happy to be here. Carmen, I think she's coming in from Germany. Thank you so much for this today. Another Hebrew user says they're getting very excited, which is fantastic. We have Sharona Cohen. Thank you for this virtual conference. Big honor. Oh, and here we have Amy Murrell. My newest Becca Epps book is about building a garden. Well, there you go. Fantastic. Thanks, Amy, for coming in. Amy was with us a few weeks ago already, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
She was absolutely awesome. We've got somebody else coming in saying, good morning, Steve. Sometimes their actual names don't come up, but that's the way it is. Some Vered says, thank you so much from Jerusalem.
Oh, so we have quite a number from Israel and so forth.
Right, a number.
My Jewish lineage, and I'm Jewish by the maternal line, although I didn't learn that until I was a teenager because of the sad situation my mother was put in, being raised by a father who converted to Judaism to marry her mother, but then with the rise of German nationalism became a Nazi sympathizer. So there's a wounded side to that, and I do hope someday to go to Israel. We'll look forward to that and to somehow closing the circle of these multi-generational wounds and traumas that have happened in the world, and no more dramatically than what happened in the middle part of the last century, which definitely echoed down through my family with many of my aunts and uncles not making it out of the Holocaust and so forth. But I have to confess I'm very ignorant about Jewish traditions and stuff because of all that. But I usually wear a bracelet that has written in Hebrew, "This too shall pass." So I've tried to.
Very relevant for today, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very relevant.
Absolutely.
And, you were mentioning how do you get through? One of the things that is exciting, and I want to talk a little bit about how we can do this and socially extend this, is that because of the work of the entire community, the ACT community, we know a lot about how to get through periods like this, not exactly like this, but to do it in a way that produces prosperity instead of trauma. And, really good longitudinal research with getting through violent crimes, violent storms, cancer diagnoses, school shootings, periods of time in quarantine, on and on it goes. So it's not like we come to this worldwide challenge, without knowledge. We come not just with cultural wisdom and with our personal wisdom we can bring to it, but also with scientific wisdom. And the contextual behavioral science community has been part of developing that over the last 20, 25 years. And so we're able to say some things that are pretty concrete, I think, about how best to spend some of the time. So in addition to gardening, maybe a little bit of reading about psychological flexibility processes, and in addition to Netflix and movies, maybe a little bit of time working on your own psychological flexibility skills, or learning how to socially extend them to your family and to your community. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this whole program is about trying to get over the idea and to learn a little bit and to experience also a little bit of what psychological flexibility means and what it can do for us, and why is it even important. What is that? Why be psychologically flexible? I mean, why is that good for us?
Yeah, I think it's a good. It's really a positive story, and it's one that allows us to bring kind of Western science into this cultural conversation worldwide about how best to step up to this challenge and do so in a way that creates, post-traumatic growth. I mean, there's kind of a traumatic period here where it's an invitation to trauma, but we have to do something for that invitation to turn into trauma, and we have an alternative. We can have it turn into post-traumatic growth, and I think that's some of what I want to talk about today, about how do we do that. I know a number of therapists watch, but also normal folks, and maybe I can talk in ways that would touch both those audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to invite you now to do that. And I think one of the things that people are very anxious about today, including myself, is will all this, even though like maybe the virus, maybe maybe that'll go, or maybe it'll be less dangerous for us, whatever. But will this experience be traumatic to me all my life? Will this whole experience be traumatic for my children? So this, the idea of, the choice of whether we can go in that direction of post-traumatic growth, which sounds wonderful, or going through the not so pleasant post-traumatic stress disorder. I would like to invite you now to try and take us down that road of the post-traumatic growth, Professor Stephen Eds.
Well, we do know that these psychological flexibility skills applied to yourself are so important to determining how this is going to play out. There's external things, and I do have to say that in some countries, some of the political leaders and so forth are not so wise. I may be living in one. In fact, I am living in one. My wife is Brazilian, and unfortunately, her relatives are living in one as well. There are other countries that have been wiser. And because we do know that getting through a challenge like this requires things like, accurate information. You don't want to have a cacophony of contradictory voices here. You want to know something about what's likely to happen. Removing some of the needless uncertainties to best you can, and being able to have the resources. There are some people listening probably watching in countries where the resources are very, very stretched, and others not so much, and that makes a big difference. But the psychological part makes a difference as well. If we can face this challenge in a way that is emotionally open, and we are able to better treat the natural distress, uncertainty, etc., to be able to watch our minds at work, trying to step up to this challenge and to make room for a variety of fears and emotional reactions, lethality. People close to us may be getting sick. I got a call not too long ago from my eldest daughter that she had a fever and had a cough. And of course, I'm fearing the worst. In fact, she may have gone through, it would lasted long enough and had enough symptoms. She may have gone through an infection, but she never admitted herself to the hospital, and thankfully it passed. But so we're challenged emotionally, learning how to be more open to that, and then to come consciously into the present moment with what the situation affords and see the opportunities there. Noticing the need that your family might have for a conversation, or the opportunity to text or call your friends or family, or to focus on things that are of importance, such as having some downtime, or working on creating beauty, or growing that garden, and then to be able to find in those moments things that bring meaning and purpose, and build habits around that. And those are the psychological flexibility skills. I just said them in a normal tone, but if you know the model, all six are there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the social challenge, because this is a worldwide phenomenon, and we are in this odd situation in which we're all in the same boat to a degree, and yet we're being required to socially distance or physically distance, and often to shelter in place, and it's now just opening up. So you have this paradox, really, or this kind of dialectic of if it's all of us everywhere at the same time that we're isolated. And so what I wanted to do here was to talk a little bit to the therapists, but also folks who've done any kind of reading about ACT and psychological flexibility, maybe through self-help books or things of that kind, and to talk about how we might dig down to the core yearnings that are inside our inflexibility processes, our flexibility processes, and how they're socially extended. And then I'll do a couple exercises, perhaps, so you can kind of see how this would actually land. I do a fair amount of writing about this only in one place. That's in my new book, Liberated Mind. Excuse the commercial, but it is the only place that I really dive into an exploration of the possibility that there's a kind of natural human motivation that's inside the things that we do that create us problems, that are inside our avoidance of emotions or our entanglement with thoughts, or with our attentional rigidity, or our wrapping ourselves around a storied self and a comparison to others, or to be responding impulsively or more based on kind of mindless motivation and building habits around the wrong kinds of things that what we really stand for inside those very processes that create so much problem, or human yearnings that can be channeled in a new direction and are the real core of what we want, even in the things we're doing inside things that are pathological. I mean, the core idea here is that we're coming up with the wrong answers for the right problem. Human beings are not deliberately going out and messing themselves up, but they have this evolutionarily recent thing of the logical, judgmental mind, which probably originally was evolved for cooperation, but now is turned over into problem solving, and it's turned on us and it's created our lives as a problem to be solved. And if we learn to rein in that mind and then come into the moment in a way that is more in touch with who we really are, we can learn these flexibility skills. And what I want to talk about today is how to take that same yearning and socially extend them. Because this isn't, I mean, ACT and psychological flexibility is a psychological model, and the psychological level is the whole person living in and with a world that's considered both historically and situationally. That's the level of analysis of psychology. But psychology is nested in other levels of analysis. It's nested in small groups and in larger groups. And the world within includes parts of us that are competing one with the other in terms of our repertoire, but also our underlying biology. And even within us, whole ecosystems. I mean, it turns out that data now on what's going on in your gut biome, I mean, there's literally bacteria pulling the little strings to channel into parts of your brain that determine, for example, when you're hungry and for what. It's really kind of like a little shop of horrors, feed me is going on through.
Going on in there, isn't there?
It's like you have more cells inside you that are not human than human. I mean, that's how dominant an ecosystem it is. So we need to think about ourselves in multiple levels and in multiple ways. And the one that I wanted to think about today is the small step forward from psychological flexibility to its social extension, so that in your family or wherever you're sheltered in place and so forth, you might be able to apply these processes to that social extension. I've written about how to apply it even more into organizations and things of that kind, some of which I want to talk about is relevant to that, but some of it requires a different level of analysis. You really need to go to a more sociological, political science, anthropological level. And I've tried to do that in a new book called Pro-Social, where we were mixing ACT with Lynn Ostrom's, the late Nobel Prize winning political scientist, Lynn Ostrom's core design principles. I won't talk about that. That's an additional step. So I'm going to take a small step in the social direction. If you're interested, if something resonates, I've taken a bigger step with my colleagues, David Sloan Wilson and Paul Atkins. And that book is now available, and you can go to prosocial.world and for free get lots of information about how to take even an additional step to do things like organizing small groups to step up to the climate change crisis, or to immigration, or other things that might be important. So let me just walk through how to take psychological flexibility and socially extend it.
Absolutely.
Are we on board? Sound like a worthwhile thing to do?
Absolutely. Just before you start, we've got Graciela Rovner saying, nice to be here. Thank you both. And Lara saying, love that you're talking about the microbiome, really the future of health and mental health, in my humble opinion. So you're absolutely spot on. And we've got Bradley saying life is a worldwide phenomenon, as is death, attachment, and avoidance. Yeah. So let's carry on with your stuff, and we'll get back to lots of people writing in, and but we'll try and get to them as soon as we can. But again, over to you, Stephen Hayes.
So I'm going to socially extend each of the 6 psychological flexibility processes, and I want to do this in a way that touches the underlying yearnings or motivation that I think are at the core of what we really want inside the things that we do that limit our life, but also inside the things that we do that expand our life. And I'll have time to mention all 6 and to give a little bit of a shape to it. I'm going to explore this in more detail, actually, for therapists, and on an online course that's coming this summer that builds on one that's already available called Act Immersion. There's a new one coming that will be out in late June. And it's hopefully, if it's of interest to you, if you're the therapist listening, there's a way to go to that will kind of build on this. I've been working on it for some time. Let's start with consciousness itself. If you've read A Liberated Mind, or if you've dug into the evolutionary basis of relational frame theory and the cognitive relations that help build out this sense of awareness, this I hear nowness of awareness that is already there even before language starts, this perspective taking and a kind of theory of mind skills that even infants have, and that I think are so critical to developing symbolic language itself. I tell that story in a scientific article called Cooperation Came First. But consciousness, being this I hear now awareness, builds on a set of cognitive relations that go beyond simply the awareness that's there, that leads to these basic perspective taking and theory of mind skills, that are these relations of I, you, here, there, now, then. And as we teach children these perspective taking relationships, somewhere around age 3 or 4, I hear nowness comes together. The way they come usually is person first. Young children will get I and you as 2 different perspectives first. Then they'll get place, here and there. It's hard to learn because when you go there becomes here and here becomes there. It's very frustrating to kids because it's with reference to a perspective or point of view. And the last one is time, now and then. When they come together, sort of like comets whirling around, each with a bidirectional polar relationship, and they form into the I hear nowness of awareness, infantile amnesia occurs because we enter into a new world in which a strand of consciousness can put the beads of memory and experience on it. Because of that time, place, and person cognitive relations that are informed in I hear nowness of this kind of witnessing self or observing self or spiritual self, it means that we are in awareness itself, connected in consciousness to the consciousness of others. That starts before language. I mean, when your mama gets in front of you and says, "Oh, you sweet baby," and looks you in the eye, you start dumping natural endorphins because you become evolutionarily prepared to be part of the group. It's important that you do. You're going to be dependent on others in infancy, and we're the tribal primates. The group is going to have to be the key focus, and you come prepared to do that. But now with this verbal extension, this cognitive extension, this symbolic extension into this sense of the observing self, connected in consciousness to others, we have a possibility to extend out in our perspective-taking skills into conscious connection with others, to a we that's aware, and to attachment and consciousness to others. I think our yearning for attachment, for secure attachments and so forth, extends into this verbal development period in the early childhood, and it extends out through our whole lifetime of development. And so one of the things this means is, in a way, in consciousness, we're never alone. Consciousness itself is social. It's not you that's aware, it's we that is aware, and you're part of the we. You entered into the hive mind in order to be able to do what you're doing when you notice things. And sort of what that means is, here in isolation, if we go to this element of consciousness, we can deliberately expand out and create our sense of awareness and connection to the group. So let's do a little exercise that might do that. It's best done as an eyes closed exercise. If you're by yourself, it's easy to do. If you're in a group with others and you're uncomfortable with closing your eyes, you can simply cover your eyes. But what I'd like you to do is to start out simply becoming aware of a bodily sensation. If you drift away, come back and follow the sound of my voice. But I want you to focus on any particular bodily sensation that you can notice. Do a little body scan, perhaps start with your feet and kind of swoop up, sort of as you might if you were stepping into a hot tub, where you kind of, there's a zone as you slide down into the tub that swoops up and eventually covers your entire body. And if you notice any part of your body stepping out as having a sensation that's distinguishable, just notice that. Notice exactly where in your body you're feeling it and what it feels like. And then catch that you're noticing. Notice that you're noticing. That part of your body is not noticing itself. There's a whole human being who's listening to me right now who's noticing. And don't grab that part and look at it. What I want you to do is just touch for a second that you're here, and there's a part of your total experience that involves looking from. There's a fromness to awareness. And just touch that. And then I want you to see if you could take that and let's move it around, and move it around different parts of the world. I want you to think about where you are and the people close, maybe in your home or in your apartment building, and what they might be doing right now, and include in that maybe some awareness of the challenges they're feeling based on this virus crisis, what they've been through, the feelings that may be associated with that, the fears that might be associated with that. And don't disappear into those. What I want you to catch instead is, as you kind of move your perspective around, is your awareness that there are others. It was in the background when we were talking, but put it in the foreground now. There are others not too far from you right now. And you might not even know who they are and a bit about what they do. And if you become aware of that, take a little moment to go behind their eyes right now, or behind into their awareness right now, and become aware of their awareness. And then it's possible, it could happen, that right now they're also aware of you. My son is upstairs making a little bit of noise. I hope it's not recording here. I know he's on his computer playing his video games with friends. But I know he also thinks about me. And just moments ago, I said, try to remember not to tap your feet. I'll be on a podcast. And that might come to his thought. He might actually picture me right this moment talking to you. So as I'm aware of him, I want to expand out to the possibility of his awareness of me right now. And do the same thing with the people you're aware of, who are close to you right now. You're known. Your existence is known to them. If you suddenly disappeared, they'd say, where did he go? Where did she go? They're tracking. And so even if you're all by yourself in front of your computer right now, you're here in a social group. And let's expand this out a bit now. It's not just the people who are close physically. We just had a little thing where Dov was walking us through who's online in Toronto or in Jerusalem or Germany. And we heard a few things from these different people. From Laura and Graciela and Amy and others. And so just for a moment, become aware of the fact that right now, you're in a very large extended group who's listening to me right now. And as I said some of those names, some of them know those names, and they are now aware of people thousands of miles away right now. And some of their awareness includes their awareness of the rest of us right now, not just the ones that are named. You might know people who say, oh, I'm going to go on, I'll be on that. I think I'm going to listen to that. And some of those may be thousands of miles away. Friends of yours who maybe emailed you or you emailed them. And even as I say this right now, they may be thinking of you as you are thinking of them. You are not alone. There's a we here. And I'll expand this out a little more so that we can include all of the millions and all of the billions who are right here, right now, dealing with this worldwide crisis and are facing challenges. Some are ill. And the challenge is literally the fight for their life. Others are thinking about family members who are in that situation, or of those who've been recently lost. Others are reading their paper and seeing the statistics go up, or are contemplating whether or not to put on that mask and leave their apartment or their home. And what I want you to do is to sort of settle into, just like you did, of settling into this hot tub of awareness of your own body. Settle into this hot tub of awareness of the we. We're the social primates. We're the human beings. You were invited into this group by those sweet eyes of your mama or your dad who said, oh, you sweet baby. And you took advantage of that invitation. That's why you can listen to me now. And inside that awareness, as you expand that out, It is not me alone. It's we together who are facing this challenge. And so my question to you would be, as we prepare to come back in awareness, bring your tendrils back, all the way back to where you're sitting now in front of this machine, being aware of your body and noticing your awareness of your thoughts and your feelings and listening to me now. I have a question for you, which is, would you be willing for part of this day to be mindful of the we, so that those little decisions you make when you tend your garden, or you decide whether or not to go out, or you click on that little button that allows you to contribute funds to others, or you think through whether or not you're going to make a call to a relative who maybe talks on too long, and you'll know that it'll drag on if you do, and on it goes. Would you be willing to bring into these little micro decisions the we that is being moved by the me? We're interconnected in consciousness right now. We have a worldwide challenge, and what we decide to do together right now will bend the course of history. Your personal history, the history of those you love and care about, but the history of the world itself. And could we write this history in a way that produces more compassion and connection in the world? And would you be willing to open up your heart and mind to that? There's an invitation to do it right inside your simple awareness, such as you open your eyes right now, the awareness of what's in front of you on this screen. I had my eyes closed, so if you've been watching an old man with his eyes closed and his head bent down, because I wanted to be more aware of the ineffable we that we live inside, that is a simple extension into conscious connection and attachment from the I hear nowness of awareness to this more interconnected hot tub of human consciousness. I hope that was useful, and I'll do a shorter version to try to live to my promise of just an hour of extending each of these flexibility processes. But maybe if there's a comment or a question, Dov, I'll take it here.
Wow, that was incredible, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I've never heard anything like that before, especially not in the ACT community, and this was so relevant in this day and age when we are, whether you call it social isolation, which is maybe a misnomer, or rather a physical isolation. Here you come now with the awareness of the we. This whole idea of this beehive consciousness, which I can only talk from my own personal experience, and everybody that's watching this either now or on a replay will have their experience of what they went through with you right now. But my experience is that I'm alone. My children are in Israel. My elderly mother's in Israel. This is the longest I've been in a long, long time that's been separated from them from a physical point of view. And when you brought me into that kind of idea of what they're actually, and I'm sure they are right now, thinking of me. They know that I'm doing this with you, so I will be in their minds, and they're in my minds when you brought that up. And everybody watching this, and vice versa, it was extremely comforting to know that it is more than just me.
Yeah.
Right? And this idea of the we that's, powered by the me, if you like, moved by the me, that, it's incredibly powerful, because sometimes you can just feel alone, when you're on your own. And that made me feel not just, I know I've got a son, I've got a mother, I've got friends, I know that I'm not lonely. I really do know. But it brings it into right this minute, as if they're with me right now.
Well, they are actually. They really are, in some larger way. I mean, not just by content, but by connection. And, loneliness is an epidemic in the world. And that pandemic preceded this pandemic. You know that young people are a standard deviation more anxious, depressed, and stressed than they were just 30 years ago. But also, that has correlated directly with their sense of loneliness that occurs right inside their smartphones and their constant checking on likes and the social media and so forth. And loneliness has this, both a social aspect. Do I have friends I can depend on? I mean, you know that if you ask people, do you have close friends you can depend on? It keeps going down year after year after year around the world. And with modernization, as we enter into the developed world, it gets worse. And then also this emotional sense of disconnection. But we can turn it. I think the reason why people are yearning for training in mindfulness, acceptance, values, and so forth, is they're trying to find something in this modern cacophony that reconnects us, and science can help. And if you do it right, I think these, computers in our pocket, instead of mocking us, can actually be a tool. Right now, we're connected in this conversation.
Yeah.
If you can open yourself up emotionally to it, then take advantage of what is afforded by, yes, we're connected, but now can we actually work on connecting?
Yeah.
The technology allows us to be connected, but we're doing less connecting. I think it's because we're mismanaging consciousness and the psychological processes that lead to connection. And those are the other psychological flexibility processes. This attachment and connection and consciousness is only one of 6. And if you give me permission, since I promised about an hour, which would give me about 10 minutes to finish this, I would like to walk through those other 5 in the psychological flexibility canon and show how they really have a social extension that's right there. Oh, would that be okay to turn to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just go through a couple of comments so that people don't feel that I've left them out, and then you can maybe incorporate some of their questions into
exactly what I just said. Awesome.
So, Miriam says, great that she could join. Catherine from England says, feel like I'm in the presence of a great, and I agree with Catherine there. Truly humbled to be part of this. Thank you. Ruth says that she has a question for the professor. This is a question I'm asking everyone who works in mental health. What have you learned, Professor, from your students or clients during this pandemic? Maybe you can touch on that when you start talking. Also, Yoav says from Israel, a big fan. Yeah. Values can change over time, can they? He's asking. And how can we really know that a client talks about values and not about his wishes or needs? What's the difference between values and wishes?
Yeah.
Vered says, it would be an honor to host you here in Israel, and I hope, I agree with her entirely. I hope I get the honor of being part of doing that for you.
If I can, there will be the ACBS chapter that's involved in some way, but I am looking forward to it if this ever passes and my old body can be moved around.
Yeah, we'll get you there somehow. Bradley says, life is a worldwide phenomenon. He's deaf. Attachment avoidance. We heard that. Okay, so let's go for the next steps.
Yeah, let me see if I can extend this. And those who've read and act in psychological flexibility, and the therapists as well, I think we'll see a sense. But while I won't do an exercise for each, I'll give you a little thing that you can take that's maybe practical for each. And so let's start out with this cognitive part. So we've done the work with consciousness and with that underlying yearning for belonging that's inside, I argue, human consciousness. I walk that out in a book, A Liberated Mind, and then these new courses. And then the cognitive piece that in the pathology version turns into cognitive entanglement. In the helpful one, into cognitive flexibility and diffusion, our neologism for being able to look at thoughts, not just look at the world structured by our thoughts. When we socially extend those, we have the opportunity for mutual understanding. The yearning that's inside cognition is yearning for coherence, for things fitting together. In the pathological version, we try to do literal coherence, where everything fits together in one grand, consistent set of thoughts and so forth, which is a fool's errand, because we're full of contradictory thoughts and of things that are being poured into us by our culture and our experience, some of which are not of service to us, prejudice, stigma, fears, and so on. But we can, over time, achieve a functional coherence of taking what's useful and leaving the rest, and learning how to be guided by helpful thoughts and respectfully the decline, the invitation of the mind to be guided by ones that are not helpful. When we extend that socially, we become interested in other people's thoughts and really wanting to hear them. And to hear them, not in a way of figuring them out and cleaning them up and making them all line up and who's right and who's wrong, but hearing them in this more diffused and open way of being able to appreciate and come to a mutual understanding. And so the kind of things that would be helpful there would be things like, in this more open, psychologically flexible space, in our interactions, to have a little bit of time to say, to, for example, repeat back to people what we're hearing. So what I'm hearing you saying is, and simply say it in a way that's as non-judgmental, as purely descriptive as you can manage. And to explicate that and show some appreciation for it. Like, oh, that's interesting. Does that have a history? Does that thought does that connect, and where has that shown up in other areas of your life? Was that in your, is there a family of origin thing? Is there something of importance in there that's like a value for you? Of simply, in other words, entering into conversations where what's of importance is laying out the cognitive reality that the person you're interacting with lives inside. In English, we use the word understanding, and it literally came, apparently, I think this etymology is correct, of laying out before the kings, how the armies were laid out, explication, explain. We even said a plane, like a flat plane, laying it out, understanding, like standing up down below, explaining. I think we can lay out and explain in a way that's not mindy and judgmental, but is open and exploratory, sort of like holding in our consciousness together a variety of thoughts and appreciating that. So take your time to restate things that your friends or family are stating in a non-judgmental way. Make sure that you're hearing it, and even ask about its history or how it amplifies without getting judgmental and coming into, wait, why do you think that? You should think this. If we do the same thing with affect, the underlying yearning that's there in experiential avoidance And in acceptance and emotional flexibility is the yearning to feel fully and without needless defense. And if you expand that out socially, what that means is compassion. I think you might have noticed a little bit in how Nozick's socially extending consciousness itself, that as we do that, we begin to see the suffering of others, to see the pain of others, to see the aspirations of others, to appreciate the joy of others. And so in listening, amplifying, intending to alleviate needless suffering, bringing ourselves into an intentional embrace of human experience of others, and asking questions about what they're feeling, how long they felt it. Does that have a backstory? Where has that occurred? Not in a way to figure out, judge, and eliminate and control, but as a way of sort of holding fully in consciousness what it's like to be someone else with a history. How has it been like for you to be going through this COVID crisis, and really being interested in a compassionate embrace of the other person's experience. If we extend attentional processes, contacting the now in a way that's flexible, fluid, and voluntary into others, into the we, then we have the capacity for joint attention. The yearning that's inside these attentional processes is orientation, to sort of know what's up, to know what's here. And we can notice what's up here between us. What's here in the betweenness right now? Is that going on right now between us? And asking about how things are landing cognitively and socially from this point of consciousness sets up that conversation to have a joint attention of the we interaction that's occurring in a way that's not dominated by problem solving, but is dominated more by the motive mind that you bring to seeing a sunset or listening to the suffering of a child. So joint attention is a place that we can go. Motivation, values. In the psychological flexibility work, there's a yearning for meaning and purpose. We mismanage that when we turn it over to materialism, to applause, to mindless self-soothing, to self-gratification, and instead connect with the qualities of being and doing that we want to put into our lives. When we extend that socially, we open up the possibility of joint values, relationship values, family values, community values, neighborhood values, values of our nation, values of the world. And they're naturally nested in that way. And so what is the we values that we want to produce inside this COVID crisis? I think what we're doing right now by just being here and having this discussion, and by being part of a series of things that Dov has set up, out of his concern, out of his values, we're sort of entering into a social values game right now. And we can do that consciously as we create small groups, organizations, etc. What are we doing inside our clinic? What are we doing inside our business? What are we doing inside our church group? And so on. And so taking the time, if you're used to the kind of matrix way of thinking about values, of looking at what you would want to move toward, it's on the inside and it shows up on the outside. Don't just do it for the me, do it for the we. And this sense of shared values and acknowledgement of each other's values in community builds us up. And I think it helps actually answer one of the questions that came earlier, because you'll find it difficult to do that with mindy, automatic, mindless kind of goals and self-gratification. They just don't translate socially, but real values do. There's a quality of being and doing that you admire. That's why one way that you get to values is think about who are your guides and heroes. if you really look at that, that's one of the 4 big ways I know of: sweet, sad, heroes, and stories that take you into values. If you don't know what I'm talking about, some of these other sources I've mentioned will walk you into that. But when you think of a hero, like who would be your model for how to handle the coronavirus, I bet you see in there values that you would like to put into your behavior. So in the same way that the me of consciousness comes from the social we of community and the verbal community that brought you in, the we really comes first. The me doesn't come first. The same is true with values. Values are part of us. And yes, you own it. Yes, you choose. Yes, that's what really makes them alive. But no, they're not selfish and alone and cut off. Values have to do with the human communities in which you're raised. And so taking the time to socially extend and acknowledge will help you see the parts of meaning and purpose that are true to this kind of psychological flexibility meaning of what meaning is. And then the final one is competence. The final yearning that's there inside the psychological flexibility model is committed action, where the commitment is to larger and larger habits of values-based action and being willing to go through the one step at a time skill building steps it takes to learn how to get more and more ingrained in, by practice and pattern, by repetition and by linkage to larger groupings of actions to build habits of values-based action. The commitment in committed action is to that. And so instead of mindlessly procrastinating or getting busy for no purpose or grasping or wanting to be competent simply by springing forth from the head of Zeus, we humbly walk through the one step at a time pattern of building our committed action skills. Well, when we socially extend that, we now take advantage of our cooperative nature, which is the source of all of this, I believe. It's the source of human language and cognition itself. And I've written about that, and I've walked through some of the science of that. You can put that into now shared commitments. And it's not by accident that when you have an individual commitment and you say it out loud to others, it now becomes much more real. In the same way, when we socially extend, we can ask, what are we committed to? What are we committed to as a human community, but down in all of our subgroupings? Dov kindly talked about the feeling that he had from the ACBS community, the Contextual Behavioral Science or ACT community of generosity and so forth. That has been put into our community one step at a time by taking the psychological flexibility model, organizing our very organization around it, taking the time to produce a more accepting, cognitively open, conscious, connected approach to things that is values-based, and in all these tiny little ways of listening, allowing other people's voices to come in, values-based dues. I mean, if you know about our organization, forgive me for making it an example, but I think it is a good example. We've been able to create a cultural practice of generosity that could be lost. It's not automatic. If you do it mindlessly, it will be lost. But when you bring these values-based choices into these habits, you can create community habits. You can create social habits. You can do that. You're doing that all the time in your relationships, in your family, but you can do it in your business. You can do it in your clinic. You can do it in your neighborhood. You can do it in your nation. You can do it in the world. And, this is the deal, I think. We are on a multi-generational, several hundred-year journey to evolve as human beings, to create a culture and a science that affords us, with our scientific knowledge, greater and greater success in building a compassionate and supportive and psychologically uplifting world. I think when we get beyond the kind of me into a we-based focus on what are the processes that help do that, then we can get less concerned about, is it called ACT, or is it called this or that, or who are our heroes, and instead focus on what are the processes that make a difference in human lives, and whether or not we're remembered for that, whether or not there's a label we can cling to, or a little, side business we can create, really is not important. All boats will rise, but let's keep our eye on the prize, which is how to create, in the case of our work with ACT, a behavioral science more adequate to the challenge of the human condition. And I think we are making progress, and the we is not just the ACT people, but behavioral scientists more generally, in the service of what? In the service of the human community more generally. And, this COVID crisis is a good place to apply that knowledge, and also a good kind of crucible for whether or not that knowledge is really useful. So far it appears to be, and I hope this way of thinking of how to extend the psychological flexibility processes you find useful in your therapy work, if you're a clinician or a practitioner, and if you're just a person at large out there. I hope you pursue a bit about the knowledge about psychological flexibility and start focusing on how to socially extend it so that it empowers your families, community, businesses, and the world. And so maybe that's a place we can do a little bit of a chat. I went a little longer than an hour, but only by a few minutes. And I hope you see how you can do it. You can extend these psychological flexibility processes socially.
All boats will rise. When I asked you to come on board here to give a nano workshop, what I did not expect was a mega world-class workshop, and I really do appreciate it, and I think everybody else does. I'm not going to speak. I want to hand it over to a few comments. So we've got Alon Dangor says, thank you, Professor. Kath says, completely blown away, feel very moved. Ruth is saying, I love that you're reminding us to reconnect on a social level. I thought that was really interesting exercise. I experienced a sense of aloneness and then reconnect to the we. Powerful. Absolutely. Really, really touching people. Nikki Lachs says, thank you. That was wonderful as you took us on a journey of expansion to include so many others. I just sensed this wider and wider smile on my lips. Absolutely. Somebody's saying here something that I was going through my mind. I will re-listen to this. Absolutely. I'm definitely going to be going over this again and again. Nikki says, thank you so much. Totally inspiring. And indeed, it's been totally inspiring. And there is so many other comments that we're going to leave them. You can have a look at them. We can have a look at them on the Facebook page afterwards. I cannot take up much more of your time. I know you have a busy schedule, but I really appreciate every second that you gave over to us. Again, it just shows the generosity, but not only the time factor, the depth, that renewal of information, of ideas for me, of this expansion of the social conscience. I really, really attach myself to that. It's something that's very, very special to me, especially under the circumstances that I'm living in, but it will certainly help me with the people that I work with and my colleagues and my clients. And Stephen C. Hayes, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you and with your viewers and listeners. And I would ask, if you were moved by this, to just think about how you might amplify it in your own groups by helping people through this time, because people are suffering. These flexibility skills are not known to all. They're in our wisdom traditions, our spiritual traditions. They're in our scriptural texts, etc. But so many people are in the modern world getting lost. They're drowning in commercialism and in materialism and in temptations to things that are the exact opposite of what science shows creates a healthy psychological approach to your own life and your ability to connect with others. And so we have to get busy. We have work to do, and the we is all of us, and the target of the work is all of us. So if it was something moving, I hope it moves you in that direction. And,
absolutely. Unashamedly, I have my copy here and I recommend it to everybody. I'm very privileged to have a signed copy and I'm proud of it. Thank you very much, Professor Steve.
Thank you, my friend. And thank